Hello, this is Derek Manky with FortiGuardLIVE. Once again, I'm joined with my esteemed colleague and fellow researcher, Aamir Lakhani. Welcome to the show, Aamir. How are you?
I am great. It is good to be back.
Absolutely, always good and relevant on time. Every year we like to put on our educated crystal ball on display, right? This is looking at not just in theory, what's going to happen in the years to come in terms of threat trends. But this, we're looking at baseline data, real data every day through FortiGuard Labs, right? I mean, we get 100 billion potential threat events a day. We have machine learning, AI technology. We have obviously a group of brilliant minds. So I really like to call these educated visions that we're looking at based off these baselines. And last year, when we around this time, when we started talking about threats that we're going to see in 2020, a lot of these because they were on these baselines, have had progress. The good news is that we're getting ahead of the curve here. The bad news is that the cyber criminals are following this, right? One thing that we've been talking about for years is swarm technology, and this is really trying to ride on the success of decentralized botnets. So the biggest advance we have seen has been in IoT-based botnets. There's been a lot of activity in 2020 of IoT-based botnets. It's a problem, of course, because we're dealing with massive infrastructure that's all over the place. It's harder to clean up. It's a lot easier to take one server offline in a data center than it is to take 100,000 IoT devices offline and all these different networks and residences and offices around the world. So it's been a big threat that puts into play things like the threat of distributed denial of service, but also a swarm, things like hosted drop zones, files, the command and control infrastructure itself. There's a recent takedown attempt of the TrickBot, right? And that there's a lot of great efforts on that, but there's still a heartbeat because of this resiliency. And we've seen even botnets like HEH as an example. It's a new botnet that was recently researched and blogged about that has peer-to-peer commands, and that's the essence of swarm, right? Where devices can start to communicate with each other on networks. So there's a lot of those sort of advances. What other things are you seeing in that space, Aamir?
It's funny when you talk about predictions, it seems like in cybersecurity, it's not that hard because all you have to kind of think about is you take a current trend and think about what is the worst place that someone can go with this trend, and it'll normally happen, right? And that's exactly what we started seeing with these swarm botnets or swarm attacks itself, is because we started seeing individual systems being exploited, and then we started seeing like the multiple, these exploits going around to multiple organizations, and someone just decided, you know what, I can basically have this self-replicate go around multiple organizations, kind of figure out what the best way to transport the botnet is. And that's exactly what happened with IoT devices. Is these devices are attacking each other. They're kind of figuring out what's around them on a local network as well as on WAN networks across the internet. And we're seeing more and more of that, whether it's from a proof of concept or whether it's people talking about creating that, or whether we're actually seeing that in the real world. And as you said, we've seen this starting to expand beyond IoT. We're starting to see it expand to the routers, the edge devices, home media servers. We're starting to see it expand pretty much all over the place. And it makes it really difficult. Attackers are now hitting below the belt, I would say, because as you said, if you're an organization, if you're a corporation, you have some resources and you have some, motivation to make sure your systems are not infected. When you're a home user, you may not have any idea a camera or a media player or a DVD player is infected, because when you use it, it works fine, and you have no idea that it's actually attacking other people or causing more harm. And I think that's the hard part on what we're seeing is we're going to see more of that, is people not going to realize the volume of attacks that are coming from their individual devices. And I think personal responsibility is going to get very, very interesting in the next 12 to 18 months.
Yeah, for sure. You hit on a lot of points there, and that's a concerning thing to me as well. Like, it's one thing to have these devices infected, but sort of been a year of execution now. We've seen a lot of proof of concepts before, which is essentially just, showing that devices can be effective, but they're not always used in orchestrated attacks. But like you said, we are starting to see these being used and have impacts on people. And we always talk about this situational awareness from a good guys or defender standpoint, right? Where you have to be aware of what's happening. And part of that is having visibility. If you don't have visibility on these devices that are infected, you have no idea what they're up to. And there can be consequences with that. And I want to go a little bit more into that. You mentioned Edge, Aamir. So this is also part of our trends that we're looking at 2021. There's been a big push to the edge computing. That's something that's going to continue to grow. One of going back to Swarm, we talked about these scenarios. It's a good news, bad news, the way I describe this. The good news is that we're not seeing full weaponization of this in the sense of its fullest capabilities by mainly using machine learning models to be able to make intelligent decisions on its own. So basically autonomous malware, if you will, right? We haven't seen that yet. That's the good news. The bad news is we are seeing a trend towards that because this integration's happening. And now with edge devices, the main difference from edge to IoT is that edge is, they have generally a bigger footprint, right? More reach, more access, more authorization privilege, and more processing power, memory as an example, task functionality. And so to me, when you have this combined, that brings on this possibility, this whole new world of having that machine learning and those attacks in the future. But we just haven't seen that yet.
No, we've definitely seen some very selective attacks, and this is happening for a few years now, where people are attacking edge devices, especially like home routers, which that's what I normally consider an edge device on the consumer side. Obviously, we go to the enterprise side as well, and there's definitely been attacks on that side as well. So as you said, a lot more capabilities on the edge device just from a computing power, usually from a bandwidth power, usually from a manipulation standpoint as well. And I know this is one of our other predictions you want to talk about later on, but like just redirecting people to like fake sites, taking over DNS systems, putting in proxy systems in between to capture information, doing like man-in-the-middle attacks. And so I definitely think we're going to see that. The problem is no one really knows what the edge is anymore because it's, as you said, it's a home device, but it's everywhere now, right? The edge is there is no edge. We are the edge.
It's a great point. And I really think that we're going to see this whole new rise of threat called what we're calling EATs, or edge access Trojans. I mean, traditionally we have RATs, a remote access Trojan, which infects usually a PC or in some cases mobile devices for remote control. Same concept. It's just that this is going to be on these ever-present devices on the edge, right? And that's something. If we look at, let's talk about some classes of edge. I think you're right. The router on the perimeter. And everybody says the perimeter is dead, but traditionally the perimeter has been that edge, right? But now the edge also is including these other devices, everything from critical infrastructure in the field, I would say, remotely, but also in home users' environments. There's also things that is very familiar to consumers, like virtual assistants. These are things that are processing and voice data, as an example. They have machine learning. I think you've been talking also about threats with this, right? In terms of intelligence and social engineering.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what attackers are realizing is that, we do a lot more with computing devices besides our PCs. We use voice assistance devices all the time. Hey, voice assist. I don't want to set off any voice assistant, but hey, tell me what time it is, or tell me, something. One common attack we started seeing is where someone would take a similar sounding skill or a similar sounding verb or some sort of phrase that you would ask a voice device, and they would take over and say like, wow, I'm glad you asked me this question. User, you're in trouble. You got a big problem. Your bank account's being hacked. And, we'll send you a link right away to your phone or to your synced device and click on that to see what's really going on. that's just another attack, phishing attack. So we're seeing phishing attacks on smart devices. I also think kind of the popularity of like just the ARM processor architecture, as well as like more availability of like real-time operating systems, of more simulation and ways of virtualizing different attacks, has made it a lot easier for attackers to try new techniques against like OT, against like these smaller devices, against like our mobile phones. So I think we're going to see a lot more attacks on devices we really didn't even think about. Like I mean, I'm not really expecting like my refrigerator to like steal my bank account information, but who knows what we're going to see with the availability of these devices becoming so popular, and attackers definitely having an interest in them and having the ability to simulate them as well as test against them.
Yeah, of course. And that's the thing, right? I think these edge devices themselves, and it kind of goes back to this edge access Trojan I was talking about, when they're compromised, that's rich data to attackers, right? And we always talk about attackers knowing the more they know about you, the more they can leverage that for a social engineering attack. And I mean, that can be used for certainly with machine learning automation. I know there's been there have been AI-driven voice phishing attacks that have already happened.
Right.
So yeah, I expect to see more of that too. I mean, it's a whole new world. I think it's going to be a lot of interesting scenarios that play out in 2021. There's also, this whole notion of the edge expanding, like we talked about. So now there's also, again, these empowered edge devices that are going to be connected, ever more connected through the world of 5G. The edge is even expanding into space, literally, because we now have more satellites that are being launched that are going to provide consumer satellite broadband. And that's a whole new world too. That's going to be more connectivity for attackers. And so I think traditional cases we see right now, like ransom attacks, are going to expand to these, ransoming edge devices as well. I mean, there's a lot of, again, rich data, but rich targets, I would say, for with these new scenarios, right?
Yeah, I'm hoping 5G or low orbit internet satellites is going to give me the ability to move out in the country, get a farm, get a couple of animals, and like get a good internet service, right? And still be able to stream my Netflix. Now that's the dream, that's the promise. The nightmare is that now we have a lot of bandwidth to be attacked on, and attackers have a lot of bandwidth to reach out to users, reach out to individuals, and also weaponize, as you said, a lot of like different types of devices, whether it's edge, whether it's IoT, whether it's taking advantage of swarm type attack technology, and really being able to, unfortunately, do a lot of damage. And I think we're going to see that as a tool, at least as one of the ingredients used in more ransomware and more denial of service attacks.
Yeah, and I think, as we've talked about before, we're moving towards this world where there's going to be no more such thing, or very little of no connection, or no such thing as a signal strength bar, because it's omnipresent. But that comes with that attack surface and a lot of nightmare scenarios, I think, like you said. One last thing I want to talk about before we wrap up, Aamir, is also, this is more forward looking, is the quantum threat as well too. In the world of quantum computing, the essence is that with quantum computers, it's promising just exponential more power, essentially, because of the way it handles qubits and processing in different layers than traditional computers do. What are the threats that are going to come along with this?
Well, let's talk about the most obvious threat is, first of all, encryption. We for years and years have had encryption standards, and we expect them to hold up to a certain degree of brute forcing, a certain degree of challenges out there. That's all those models are pretty much out the window with quantum computing. And that means the whole world is going to need to change. I think what we're going to start seeing is, first, we're going to start seeing some proof of concepts coming from high-end researchers. But I think eventually, like everything else, this is eventually going to come down to scripts, come down to different modules that everyone's going to be downloading. And unfortunately, attackers are going to be downloading this and looking at maybe data sets they've grabbed, or data sets that have been on the internet that are really, really old data sets, but now they can decrypt them. Now they can learn all these passwords. They can desalt things. It's going to be a pretty scary world. I don't think we realize how much data that's being leaked that really hasn't been useful just yet. Obviously, that's just one portion of it. As we've talked about plenty of times, there's just a lot of attacks against the architecture of quantum computing. And that's kind of scary that attackers are thinking that far ahead already.
Yeah. I think all eyes on cryptography moving forward with that one. And I know, there's obviously efforts underway for things like crypto agility, which is essentially saying how quickly can you keep up to that threat by change. This is what you mean about the world needing to change. I think it's, so a lot of things to digest as usual. But the good news is we're talking about this ahead of the curve, looking at the trends and predictions. So it's never a bad time to talk about this.
Never a bad time, but resistance is futile.
Absolutely. Thanks, Aamir, again for your time. This is Derek Manky with FortiGuard Live signing off.